Hey, everybody. Welcome to a How to Succeed podcast. I'm your host, Mike Montague with Sandler. Sandler is the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training. You can find us at sandler.com. We're talking about how to succeed at doing a story-led demo with Nick Capozi. He is head of storytelling at Demo Stack, so he knows a few things about stories and about demos, and that's what we're going to talk about here. How to succeed at storytelling in your sales demos. Here we go. Okay, now, what I wanted to ask you, Nick, here, starting off, is why is storytelling in demos most important? Why is this your thing?
I give it to you this simply. If I threw numbers or features or benefits at you, you're not going to remember it. And if you're my champion, you're not going to tell it to the rest of your team the way I want you to tell it. But if I tell a great story, it's something humans have been doing since the dawn of humanity, you're more likely to tell that story the same way to exactly who I want you to tell it. Ergo, it's kind of like having me in there telling the story to other stakeholders in your organization.
I love that. And I think at Sandler, we talk a lot about selling to pain and how do we really connect emotionally with our buyers, right? That people make decisions intellectually, but they buy emotionally. They want to get connected to it and stuff. And I've kind of found that the best way to get credibility with your buyer is to connect with them and tell their story better than they can tell it themselves. Like if you can really tell their story, that's what they want to talk about, right? Those are the problems they want to solve. That's the story they're most invested in. Even when you're telling a third party story about somebody else's, life, career, similar circumstance, it's helpful, but not as quite as powerful as when you're telling theirs. Can you talk a little bit about your attitude around storytelling and how you maybe craft a good story or anything?
Absolutely. I think what's really important is that, and I see this every day. I don't see this sometimes. I see it every day. We still talk like we're the hero of the story. It's about our product, our feature, our benefit, our tech, our solution. The buyer doesn't care about that. What the buyer cares about is their pain point and the solution that we're actually trying to solve. So you have to make them the hero of the story, the hero of the journey. And when you tell a really good story, Mike, what you're actually doing is pulling someone from the other side, from the audience, and pulling them onto the stage next to you. And if they can visualize themselves using your product because they're standing next to you, they're more likely to, one, get excited. And if they're more excited about it, they're more likely to pull in other stakeholders. And if you do that, you're going to get better deal velocity throughout the entire sales cycle.
I think that is huge. And we had a question here from Markle. He just asked, is this recorded? This is the first one we're doing live. So if you guys like it, chime in. You're watching right now. Post a comment in LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, and we can pop you right into the comments. If you're listening to this recorded on the podcast stream, we are doing these live now. So you can go to YouTube, subscribe to Sandler, and check out these live. But I think it's way more fun to do live, Nick, because we can work these into our stories that we're telling.
No, absolutely. And I just want to say, Mike, I'm super excited. I'm the first guest you're having on for a live. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, something new this year. It's gonna be fun. So I'm wondering, again, going back to the attitude part, where do you think the common misconceptions are when people try to tell stories? Where do they mess it up? Where do most salespeople go wrong?
So other than what I just talked about, making your prospect the hero of the story, I think what we do very often, and at Demo Stack, we're a pre-sales solution. We help you democratize demos. So anyone can do a demo in your organization, but we still deal with a lot of pre-sellers. And I find that when it comes to, sales engineers or people with that kind of tactical mind, they speak very technically. And the person on the other end might not be a technical person. So we get lost in kind of our jargon and our words, but does it actually relate? So I think the best way to think about it, to take a step back, is think about using vivid imagery and actually painting the picture of what's happening. What color is that? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? Things you don't normally associate those with. But if you can think about those things that way, you're more likely to take your prospect's pain point and lay out a really vivid image of their problem and how you can actually be the solution. And I'll go a step deeper, Mike, if I may. The best way to actually activate this, it's one thing to talk about it in theory, but it's one of the best tips that frankly I have that I've helped a lot of sellers with this year or last year. And I think the best way to look at this is go for a walk after work, or if you're listening to this as a podcast, what do you see in your neighborhood? You see a tree. What kind of tree is it? What does the bark look like? What is the color of that bark? Like literally is it white bark or is it like a taupe, right? If you're looking at an aspen tree, and look at how the bark actually curls up at the bottom. What does that look like? What can you associate that with? I'm just talking about a tree. I'm just talking about the bark. Frankly, we talk about the leaves. Is it a waxy, wide leaf like maybe you're in Florida? Or is it maybe a dry, brittle leaf like you're in Colorado? And what do the veins look like in that leaf? The more it might seem like a small thing or something is that even worth the time? But when you really get vivid and literally truly paint a picture of what you're trying to relay, they're more likely to absorb it and they're more likely to be engaged in that moment, which is what you want, right?
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Specificity is always great. We talk about this when you're telling your company's story in a 30-second commercial pitch or anything. The more relevant and specific you can make it to your audience, but also to what you do, the more interesting it is, right? If we're like, oh, we started a company and we sell things, well, that's true. It's not a very interesting story. We don't know what you sell, who you sell it to, what it does, but the more specific you make it, and you say, I make, really cool blue hats for storytellers, then you're like, oh, let me pay attention to that. That's something interesting, right?
Is
That
this a
you can grab
cobalt
onto.
blue, Mike, or is no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly. So I love that. I wanted to ask you, because you talked about the different parts of the process, about behavior. How do we do the right thing at the right time? I'm imagining that stories can be applied early in the sales process, like you said, pre-sales. Really great late when you're
Yep.
doing demos, proposals, presentations. But is there a right time for a story? How do you know when you need to maybe break up a pitch that's getting too intellectual, or figure out when is the appropriate time to tell a story?
So I was a trainer for a long time, actually in the cruise industry. So my sellers would literally like be off the coast of Japan, and this was a long time ago when I got into sales training. So I would have to get their tapes and literally have them FedEx me VHS tapes across the world, sit down and watch it, and then give them feedback. So that timeline would take sometimes 7 or 10 days. And the first thing I realized when I got into the B2B space, we were selling a very B2C product in cruise, but in B2B, that you now had the option with products like, conversation intelligence tools, and there's a bunch of them. I'll let you, mention those if you want, Mike. But I think with conversation intelligence tools, you can literally sit down and start watching what you're talking about. And when you start watching those, you'll see opportunities where someone is like, oh, that's interesting, but did you expand on it? Did you, again, kind of push on that pain point and get vivid with it? Or did you move along to the next thing? And what I would tell all my sellers, I had hundreds of sellers under me. What I would tell them is don't rely on me. Don't count on me to train you. I want to do that, but I might not have the time today or tomorrow. I've got other things going on, other responsibilities. So I would really try and get my team to kind of self-train themselves. Again, a long time ago, we didn't have access to things like Sandler, at least in our scope back then. So how can you actually self-improve? And when you watch your tape back, this is kind of a long story short, to watch your tape back, it's super important, but you'll start to see those opportunities to interject a story. Or when you're watching a tape back, did you tell it actually a great story, a short one, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, and you saw them go, aha, write that down because you can use that for the next time. And a lot of times we have these great stories or ways that we've positioned something to a particular persona, and then it just falls to the wayside because we haven't gone back and really watched it again and looked at it and committed that to memory. So I'm a huge fan of watching your own tape. I don't know if you can tell.
Yeah, well, I love that advice, and it's something we do here at Sandler. Even with the training and coaching that we do, practice is a huge thing. But there's also something about becoming third party. When you're in a sales call, you're in it, you're engaged. We're both
Yep.
fully present in this interview right now. It's really hard for us to see what's going on. But when we look back at the tape, we can watch it now as a third party and go, ooh, if I was watching another salesperson, what would I recommend they do? And we have a partnership with Gong. That's the one that we like the best for
I
call
like Gong
recording.
too. We use Gong at Demo Stack too. So
Yeah, there you go. So it's awesome. You can jump right to interesting parts of the conversation. You can do searches for words or stories. You can tell when your talk time got a little long. I thought that was a 2-minute story. It turns out it was a 7 or 10-minute story that might have been too long for your buyer. And I think there is a lot of interesting things that you can do there. The
So
other thing I was
what,
going to
what I
add,
would do, sorry, Mike, real quick, take the opportunity with Gong and search that's interesting. And look, you can just go through your existing calls and see those moments where people said, that's interesting. What did you say? Right? Sorry, Mike, back to you.
I love that. Now, to add on to that is I would clip those out. And like you said, we don't always have time to write scripts, or sometimes when you write them, they're not great, or you come up with a genius attack right when you're on the sales call. Clip out those things and share those recordings with the rest of your team. So, especially if you're a sales manager or leader with a lot of salespeople, how can you collect these stories and then share them out to everybody else so you can replicate those best practices? I think that's a huge behavior that will save a lot of people a lot of time and headaches.
And I think it's just thinking about telling a story, because when I was in B2C, we were selling high-end luxury goods. So Swiss watches and high-end jewelry, big brands, but you're not thinking about shopping duty-free when you're on a cruise, right? So when I got to B2B, what I realized was that selling B2B isn't as sexy. It's not a big shiny diamond. It's not a Swiss watch you can pass down to your kids. So I found that telling really interesting stories became even more critical in the B2B space. And I think once you find one that works, you really want to double down and knock that out of the park. So if I'm a sales leader, I am tracking all these great stories that pertain to, right, whatever it is I'm selling. And I think, look, I'm a big fan of, I really am a huge fan of training, Mike. I really believe in training. And I think a lot of sellers that I talk to are just not getting the training and leadership that they necessarily want above them. And it doesn't mean that the leaders don't think the training is important. But again, we've got a lot of things on our plate as leaders, a lot of responsibilities. So sometimes training almost feels like a nice to have, whereas I'm like, training is everything. This is gospel. This is what we need to be saying every single time. I'll get so into it that I'll even find crutch words for my sellers or negative words. And you're thinking, does it matter if I say can't? Yeah, it does. Because what you do is, it's neuroscience. You turn off someone's frontal lobe, you put them on the defensive. So negative words, can't, shouldn't, even maybe, can turn your prospect off. So huge fan of training, huge fan of collecting stories and things that work, because a lot of times it can be replicated by the rest of the team.
Yeah, I think that's great. You can, in Sandler words, we talk about, critical parent messages, like you're saying, you should on people, or whenever you tell them what to do rather than asking them a question. Those are great coaching moments when you're looking back at your calls. So I want to build on that and ask you more about techniques here. So
Yep.
in our technique bucket, we're talking about tools, tips, hacks, anything to get better at storytelling. You've shared a few already, but I feel like we should give you a free 30-second commercial here for Demo Stack as a tool to help you tell better stories and do better demos that win deals. Tell us about this tool and how does it help?
So what DemoStack does is it helps you spin up a tailored demo environment in a couple of minutes. So what you can do is basically anyone on your team can show product faster. And the reality is that products are like really hard to build. It's a lot of work to go in and build a product, but then you can't really highlight it because you have compliance issues and you have, your client's data behind there. So how do you protect that? So what we do is literally clone the front end of your product. So then you can go in and you can make edits and adjustments. So literally in a couple minutes. If I've never tried to sell this to a CFO, I'm always selling to CMOs. Well, now I can do one that's going to be tailored to that CFO persona really quick. And it's just super popular. And in fact, how I started realizing, I do a lot of content for DemoStack. And what I started doing was going through our Gong and looking up these things I was searching. But then I started thinking, what if I look up holy bleep? And how the bleep did you do that? And I was seeing all these sellers or these pre-sales leaders who'd been doing it one way for so long. And now here they are seeing demo stack take 4 hours of work and put it into 4 minutes. And just seeing that excitement is really, really exciting for them. So you got a great product. You worked really hard on it. Show it off better.
I love that. And I love those as keywords to search in Gong. Those are great. We're going to have to add those tags to our list for sure. Now, what about other techniques? You've mentioned some about, getting specific, looking for stories around you. We've talked about collecting other stories. Do you have any storytelling tips or tricks or hacks?
Absolutely. So much of telling a great story is just having an engaged audience. So storytelling is the very high level, 30,000 foot view, if you will, of that. But when I realized, so here's what happened. My first client that I had doing demos was a fintech company. And so it was a little bit, proper and I'll say stuffy. And I got onto my first demo and everyone on their side had their cameras off. And I'm like, what's happening here? Like, how is that possible? How am I going to gauge their engagement? Because when I was selling on a cruise ship, I was on a stage with 500 people. If I couldn't read that body language, I was dead in the water, right? I had to know that they were reacting to what I was saying when I wanted them to react. So I think body language and how you speak. So here's 2 great tips. First of all, body language is critical. And as you can see, I'm using body language right now. I'm constantly moving. I'm a big hand talker, so I always tell people if you're a hand talker, that's great because it's great at accenting points, but tie your elbows to your body. You also have
to lift that microphone out of the way. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook right now,
exactly.
You can tell. You got to get those out of the way. You don't want cords and microphones to knock over in front of you.
But watching, sorry, real quick, I'm going to say you want to know your demo, like your national anthem, up, down, left, right. You want to be able to click and know where that click spot is without looking at it, because I want to be constantly looking at my audience to make sure I'm getting their cameras on. And watch them when you have them engaged. They'll go from camera off to camera on. So body language is really key. The other, when it comes to demo, or this also applies to cold calling or any kind of interaction that a seller is going to have, is tempo, pacing, and when to pause. And the reason that's so important, I love the neuroscience of it. Mike, have you shopped for a new car in the last year by chance?
I have not. No, I've had I like the paid off car. You know what I mean?
Fair enough. But you remember when you first bought that paid off car and you were shopping for it and you suddenly saw that car everywhere?
Oh yeah, right.
But if you ask people that, they're like, oh yeah, it happens all the time. I'm shopping for a Tesla. I see a Tesla everywhere. The reason is that our conscious mind is so overloaded with information. We tell our subconscious mind what's important and what to look out for. So now when we're talking about that Tesla every day, we see it every day. The same thing happens when you're speaking. The reality is 9 out of 10 people are going to talk in the same tone throughout. And the problem with that is what you're telling the other person's subconscious mind is that this is not important because it sounds like everything else. But if you play with pace, so sometimes I'll purposely talk a little faster. And then sometimes I'll talk so slow, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. But what I'm doing is a pattern interrupt. And now I'm telling their subconscious mind, you don't hear tone and pace and tempo like this very often. This must be important. I better pay attention. And that is it works for selling. It works for content. Frankly, it works for conversations with your partner back home if you're trying to convince them to have the same thing for dinner that you actually want. So I think that's a really important tip, is varying your tone, varying your pace, and you'll know that you're doing a good job with it when it feels so slow or so fast that it feels uncomfortable. So tempo, pace.
I love that demo. At Sandler, we call that negative reverse selling. It's doing the opposite of what your prospects expect. And it could be a lot of different things. I love your examples there, but a lot of times it's counterintuitive. Salespeople think that to get somebody else excited, we need to be more excited and we need to be more animated and talk faster and louder. But sometimes when you slow down and you get quiet and you go, Nick, that's interesting. You're really making me think here. It makes them lean in to the conversation and join in more than trying to push back or hide from that hyperbole that is coming from a typical salesperson.
Absolutely. And again, this is one of the things, if I'm a sales leader, I'm training on that specific skill, because again, a more engaged prospect becomes a more excited prospect. And at the end of the day, Mike, we're all selling widgets that our competitors are also selling. But if you get someone excited, you're more likely to build a champion on their side quickly. And there's a lot of times where I've wound up in the top 3 where they eliminate the other 7. And maybe I shouldn't have been in that top 3, but I was, because I had an engaged prospect on the other side.
Love it. Once again, we're talking with Nick Capozzi from DemoStack. He is the head storyteller over there. Go to demostack.com for more information. If you want to learn more about Sandler, it's pretty easy too. Sandler.com. We both got the good domain names. Okay. Now I want to learn a little bit more about you, Nick. I'm interested at this point in your career. How do you define success for yourself?
You know what's interesting? I've had a really unique background. I was in radio and television. One day at a party, someone said, "Can you do that radio thing on a stage?" Stepped onto a cruise ship in Miami, and then kind of wound up in tech by accident because I started creating content and posting on LinkedIn regularly. So I kind of look at it like I'm playing with house money at this point. You know, I'm in my mid 40s. I've had a lot of what I view as success. So at this point, I just like doing things that are fun, and things that are fun to me are I get excited about things, and I get excited about a product like DemoStack because there's a real need for it, and I see people's reaction to it. So, you know, I think at the end of the day, Mike, you know, things that get me excited are helping people develop skills that give them more confidence, right? I'm still a trainer at heart. I've always been a trainer. And if I can make someone more comfortable on camera, if I can make them more comfortable in their demo, if I can give them actionable insights, there's a ton of them on DemoStack's LinkedIn page. You know, that's where, you know, the opportunity for me that's where I get what I'm looking for out of life is helping people at this point.
I love that. And you're actually telling my story too. I was in radio and entertainer. And,
come on.
Yeah. It was Romeo on the top 40 radio station here in Kansas City. But I love it. I love that we both found things to have fun with and make more money than what we could make in radio.
There's no money in radio. If you're a young person thinking about getting into radio, there's no money in it. Content, there's money.
Try podcasting instead. All right. Now, was there a biggest failure or lesson learned in your career, like a hurdle you had to get over in order to be successful?
So many. I mean, well, I'll tell you, the biggest one for me was when I went as a radio guy and got on a stage. I didn't know anything about selling. I had never sold anything in my entire life. And the reality was there was no enablement. I mean, we're talking 99, 2000. I'm in the middle of the ocean, no one there to train me on product. So, you know, that's when I became a big fan, and I started, you know, documenting my own process and my own learnings for myself. But then they realized that I got pretty good at training other people. And it was because I had built out this process, or I had this framework of what worked and what didn't. So, you know, I think the best way to look at it is, you know, when you're helping people and you're actually truly giving value, you're going to have more success.
Yeah, I like that. Now, do you have a favorite quote, motto, or mantra?
Iron sharpens iron. And I posted that on LinkedIn before, and I've got some pushback on it. But here's what I'm not telling you to make faux friends with the best and the brightest, but there is something to what rooms are you hanging out with? Who are you hanging out with? Who's motivating you? I mean, when I kind of wound up in this LinkedIn world and I started hanging out with all these people who were so driven and motivated to the point where they were trying to build their businesses by creating content, and I started finding them and they started finding me, suddenly I was in different rooms on a much higher level. And, you know, I'm a big fan of being around the best and brightest, and that applies to work, but that applies to your hobbies, to, you know, I live in Arizona, we hike a lot. So I want to hike with the best hikers because I want to learn new techniques. I'm trying to better myself. So big fan of iron sharpens iron.
Yeah, I like that a lot too. And I think it just makes sense. When you play up a level, you force yourself to grow and get better. When you're playing down and playing small, you can phone it in. You're not challenging yourself to really go for it. So again, I appreciate you being on the show here, Nick Capozzi. Go to demostack.com for more information. I'll give you one last swing at it here. Anything that I missed, I should have asked, anything we need to know about DemoStack?
If you're a sales leader, sit in on those conversations, sit in on those gongs. You have to do it. Find the time, make it happen. And I, you know, it is such a missed opportunity. And the reason I know it is because I have sellers calling me every day for advice on this. And I'm like, who are you talking to? They're like, well, I'm not getting this from my leadership. So if you're a leader, make sure you're hammering what you believe to be the best ways to sell to your team.
I love that. Now you can Go to demostack.com if you are looking to do product demos. Check that out. If you're looking for more sales training, customer service training, leadership training, and teaching your sales managers how to use Gong and those tools to help coach up your team, go to Sandler.com. You can click find a training location, find one near you. If you have more than one location, you can reach out to our enterprise team. We'll get you help there. As always, subscribe, give us the thumbs up, share this episode with somebody that you think needs to hear it. And whatever you are, be a good one. That's what I always say. We'll see you next time. The How to Succeed podcast is brought to you by Sandler, the worldwide leader in sales, management, and customer service training. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to click subscribe to get notified about future sales and leadership videos from Sandler.